85,000 soldiers. That is how many Russian men the Kremlin lost in just the first 3 months of 2026. 85,000. And in those same 90 days, Russia managed to recruit just over 80,000 replacements. For the first time since the war began, the math no longer works. Russia is losing more men than it can find. This is not a temporary dip. This is not a statistical anomaly. This is the beginning of a structural collapse, a slow-motion unraveling of Russia's entire war-fighting strategy, one dead soldier at a time. In this video, we will look at exactly how Russia's catastrophic casualty rate finally outpaced its ability to replace the fallen, why the Kremlin's recruitment machine is running on desperation rather than conviction, how Russia's own universities have been turned into recruitment pipelines targeting the youngest and most vulnerable students in the country, and what all of this means for the future of the war in Ukraine. But first, let us look at how Russia got here in the first place. From the very first days of the invasion, Russian commanders made a choice. It was not a subtle choice or a nuanced one. It was brutal and deliberate. They chose to treat their own soldiers as expendable. Whole squads were sent into Ukrainian positions without armor, without air cover, without any meaningful preparation. Brothers, fathers, and sons, dispatched like pieces on a chessboard by commanders who believed, apparently without limit, that raw human mass could substitute for strategy. For a while, it seemed to work, or at least it seemed to be working well enough. Russia had the bodies. It had the prisons, the poor rural communities, the ethnic minorities, the underpaid factory workers who could be pressured, coerced, or lured into signing contracts. The financial incentives were enormous by Russian standards. One-off payments that dwarfed the average annual salary. Promises of glory, stability, and a short, victorious war. The propaganda machine was running at full speed. State television told the Russian people that Ukraine was a failed state on the verge of collapse, that its soldiers were demoralized and running, that the special military operation would be over in weeks. And many believed it. Enough believed it that the Russian military could keep the conveyor belt moving. New recruits arrived. They were processed, minimally trained, and dispatched to the front. Many were dead within weeks. New recruits arrived again, the belt kept moving. But that was then. Here is the problem with building a war machine on lies and brute force. Reality eventually intervenes. And the reality that has now arrived for Vladimir Putin and his commanders is stark. Ukraine did not collapse. It did not waver. It dug in. It adapted. It mastered drone warfare with a speed and creativity that surprised even its closest allies. It developed longer-range strike capabilities, better air defenses, and a fighting force tempered by years of combat experience. Each year, Ukraine became measurably stronger, and each year, Russia bled a little more heavily for whatever ground it managed to gain. Think about what that actually means for the mathematics of a war of attrition. Russia's strategy, if it can be called a strategy, was always predicated on the assumption that it could absorb losses at a rate that Ukraine and its allies could not sustain. Military analysts call this attritional warfare. You grind the enemy down. You accept enormous casualties on your own side because you believe you have deeper reserves. You bet that your opponent breaks first. Russia made this bet in 2022, and for a time, the numbers seemed to support it. But attrition warfare has a hidden cost that its architects prefer not to discuss. It does not just exhaust the enemy, it exhausts you. Every wave of infantry thrown into a Ukrainian kill zone without armor is not just a tragedy, it is a withdrawal from a finite account. And by late 2025, Russia's account was overdrawn. The Institute for the Study of War had been tracking the warning signs as far back as February 2025. The assessment was clear and clinical. Russia's force generation apparatus appeared unable to recruit the manpower its military needed to sustain its current rate of offensive operations. The machine was starting to seize. Regional authorities were running months-long promotional campaigns to find new recruits, campaigns so intensive and widespread they were impossible to miss. Signing bonuses were climbing to levels that dramatically exceeded the average Russian salary. Legislation was quietly amended to allow people with serious and previously disqualifying medical conditions, HIV, tuberculosis, hepatitis C, to serve in the military. North Korea was asked to send troops to help hold Russian territory that Ukraine had seized. These are not the actions of a confident military power. These are the actions of a desperate one. And yet, even with all of that, the belt kept slowing down. The data compiled by German researcher Janis Kluge tells the story with uncomfortable precision. In 2024, Russia was more or less hitting its recruitment targets. The numbers were stable. Somewhere between 1,000 and 1,200 new contract soldiers were signing up every single day. That sounds like a lot, but it barely kept pace with the losses. Then, throughout 2025, the monthly numbers started to fall. Some months saw declines of 20% or more compared to the prior month. By the time 2026 arrived, Russia was averaging just 800 new recruits a day. 800, down from 1,200, a decline of roughly 30% from peak recruitment levels, even as casualties kept climbing. By the first quarter of 2026, Russia was losing several thousand more soldiers every month than it was bringing in. The recruitment organization I Want to Live, a Ukrainian state hotline that helps Russian soldiers surrender safely, put the numbers plainly. Just over 80,000 recruits entered Russian service in the first 3 months of 2026. During that same period, Ukrainian military data confirmed losses of over 85,000 Russian personnel. The gap is real, it is growing, and it is accelerating. Here is where it gets serious. At the start of the war, recruiters could at least sell the dream. Join up, grab a substantial signing bonus, do your time, come home a hero once Kyiv falls. It was a lie, but it was a credible lie. People believed it because the Kremlin's propaganda apparatus was sophisticated enough to make it seem plausible. But years passed. Kyiv did not fall. The special military operation did not end. And the stories coming back from the front, through encrypted messages, through returned soldiers, through independent media that had not yet been silenced, told a very different story. The average life expectancy of a Russian recruit, upon arrival at the front line, dropped to somewhere between 2 weeks and a month. In more recent months, it has grown even shorter. Word gets around. It does not matter how much money the Kremlin offers, if the offer amounts to a paycheck for your surviving relatives. Russia's recruiters are no longer selling opportunity. They are selling a death sentence with a signing bonus attached. So they went elsewhere for their recruits. They emptied jails, offering convicts the chance to have their sentences wiped in exchange for 6 or 12 months of military service. They recruited men with terminal illnesses who would previously have been medically exempt. They coerced people struggling with alcohol and drug addiction into signing contracts, with numerous reports indicating that many of these individuals had no meaningful understanding of what they were agreeing to. They threatened ethnic minorities and immigrants with deportation if they refused to serve. They targeted the poorest communities in the most remote corners of the country, where financial desperation made the signing bonuses harder to refuse. They even ran recruitment operations in Africa, luring men with false promises of high salaries and legitimate employment, only to find themselves shipped to the front lines of a war in a country they had never heard of. None of it has been enough. Russia is still losing more men than it can replace. And so now, the Kremlin has turned to a new target, one that, even by the standards of everything described above, represents a new low. It has turned to its university students. In April 2026, a detailed investigative report uncovered the full scale of what can only be described as a systematic campaign to recruit young Russians directly from their campuses. This is not a few posters in a hallway or a visiting officer giving a careers talk. This is a coordinated Ministry of Defense directed operation targeting students at hundreds of universities and colleges across Russia and occupied Ukrainian territories. At least 269 institutions are directly involved. That number includes some of the most prestigious universities in Russia, the very institutions that Putin himself attended. The campaign began in January 2026, just months after Russia announced the formation of a new military branch, the Unmanned Systems Forces, a unit dedicated to drone warfare. The timing was deliberate. Drone warfare is high-tech. It sounds clean, strategic, even exciting. It is the kind of thing that can be packaged and sold to a generation that grew up playing video games. And that is exactly how the Kremlin packaged it. One recruitment video shows a young Russian man in his bedroom, gaming headset on, controller in hand. A voiceover says, "You were told you were wasting time on video games." The gamer is then shown transformed into a drone operator. The narration continues, "But there is a place where your experience is especially valuable." It is slick. It is targeted. It is the language of the gaming generation turned into a recruitment tool. Another video from a university in Volgograd uses a split screen. A gamer on one side, a drone operator on the other. The caption reads, "Choose the right skin," like switching characters in a video game. Like it is all just a game. Some recruitment posts go further still, explicitly stating that gamers will be given priority in the application process. As though piloting a military drone through a Ukrainian battlefield is a natural career progression for someone who plays first-person shooters in their spare time. The Ministry of Defense issued precise instructions to participating universities. Both male and female students are to be targeted. The messaging must emphasize that recruits will gain unique knowledge and skills and face a lower risk of coming under enemy fire than ordinary soldiers. And there must be financial incentives. A minimum of 400,000 rubles, roughly $5,000, as a signing payment. Some universities are going significantly further. One prestigious institution is offering a one-time payment of around $56,000 simply to sign the contract, followed by a base annual salary of nearly $70,000. That is a staggering sum by Russian standards. And for a student struggling to pay rent, facing debt, worried about their academic future, it is the kind of number that can cloud judgment. But here is what the campaign does not tell students. Here is the lie at the center of all of it. In September 2022, Putin signed a decree on partial mobilization. That decree has never been formally canceled, and it contains a provision that has never been prominently discussed in any of these slick recruitment videos or university social media posts. The provision states that all military contracts signed while the partial mobilization decree is in force continue until the mobilization period ends. There is no end date. There is no defined conclusion, which means there is no such thing as a fixed one-year contract. A student who signs up today, lured by promises of 12 months learning drone technology far from the front lines, does not have a 12-month contract. They have a contract with no end date. They are legally bound to the Ministry of Defense for as long as the mobilization continues, which, given the current trajectory of the war, could be years. The promise of rear-line service, of being stationed away from the actual fighting, is equally fictional. There is no legal framework, no guaranteed posting, no written commitment that prevents the ministry from deploying a new drone recruit to a frontline kill zone at any moment, with zero warning and zero recourse. As one legal expert on military law explains it, the moment a person signs the contract, they become, in effect, a possession of the Ministry of Defense. The ministry can send them wherever it needs them. There is no mechanism for the recruit to object or appeal. This is not a technicality buried in the fine print. This is the entire structure of the agreement. And the universities promoting these contracts know it. Which brings us to the most disturbing aspect of this entire story. Universities are not passive participants in this campaign. They are active agents. Some have been found shortening deadlines for coursework submissions, making it structurally harder for students to pass their classes. The logic is not subtle. If more students fail, more students find themselves in academic jeopardy. Students in academic jeopardy are under pressure. Students under pressure are easier to recruit. Make the academic environment more stressful. Create a population of frightened and financially exposed young people, and then offer them a way out. Sign here. We will take care of the rest. Some universities are going even further. Staff have been identifying first-year students with mental health difficulties or those struggling to integrate socially and inviting them to personal discussions. In these private meetings, students are offered what amounts to a bargain. Join the military, and your academic future will be secured. You will not have to worry about failing out. Just sign. Think about what that actually means. Universities, places built specifically to nurture young minds, to provide safety and structure during one of the most formative and vulnerable periods of a person's life, are being weaponized. They are identifying the most vulnerable students, the ones with anxiety, with depression, with isolation, with financial desperation, and exploiting those vulnerabilities to feed a war machine that will almost certainly kill them. One student described attending a meeting convened exclusively for those falling behind in their studies. It was framed as a support session. It turned into a recruitment pitch. Another described how roughly a third of their student cohort was nearly expelled before being pressured to sign military contracts on the spot as a condition of remaining enrolled. One student's words, shared with investigators, cut through all the abstraction. She said she never imagined that her university would become something she had to protect her friends from. That sentence deserves to sit in silence for a moment. Russia's military is not just struggling to find soldiers. It is now so desperate that it is turning the education system itself into a trap. It is targeting teenagers and young adults at the moment of maximum vulnerability in their lives, surrounding them with institutional authority and financial pressure, and exploiting their trust in the one place they were supposed to be safe. And it is lying to them, systematically, deliberately, and with the full backing of the Ministry of Defense. And yet, even this may not be enough. The students who spoke to investigators were largely skeptical. Many reported that none of their peers were seriously considering signing up, even those in financial difficulty. The propaganda is visible to them. The lies are legible. One student described the entire campaign as a scam and urged classmates to see it for what it was. The generation that Russia is now targeting grew up with the internet. They know how to find information that the Kremlin would prefer they not find. They have seen the videos from the front lines, the casualty figures, the coffins coming home in unmarked vehicles. They are not the easily manipulated audience that signed up in 2022 when the war still seemed like it might end quickly. But some will sign. Some will be too desperate, too frightened, too isolated to resist. Some will look at $56,000 and see a way out of a life that feels like it has no other exits. And for those students, the consequences will likely be catastrophic, because the contract they signed is not what they will be told it is. And the war they are being sent to is not a video game. And the drones they are promised to operate will not always be operated safely from a rear-line facility far from Ukrainian artillery. Russia built its war strategy on a simple premise, that it could always find more men. For years, that premise held, not because it was a good strategy, but because Russia is an enormous country with an enormous population, and a government willing to use every tool available, financial, legal, coercive, fraudulent, to keep the conveyor belt moving. But a conveyor belt built on lies and desperation is a fragile machine. And in late 2025, it started to break. Russia planned this war for a version of Ukraine that no longer exists. It planned for a country that would fold within weeks, that could be pacified with minimal force, that lacked the resolve and the international support to mount a sustained defense. What replaced it is a battle-hardened, technologically sophisticated fighting force backed by years of Western support, fighting on home soil with everything at stake. And Russia is left recruiting students with promises it cannot keep, for a war it cannot win, with a military machine that is now consuming more men than the country can produce. The recruiting numbers will not recover. The casualty rate will not fall. And every lie the Kremlin tells to bring another reluctant young person to the front line is one more thread pulled from a fabric that is already beginning to unravel. Russia did not just miscalculate the war, it miscalculated its own limits. And those limits have now arrived. If you found value in this, subscribe so you do not miss what comes next.